Listen to the sound echoing across the vast expanses of the Sahel. It is the deep, steady roar of thousands of heavy diesel engines cutting through the red dust, moving relentlessly forward under the burning African sun. Now, imagine a completely different sound just a few hundred miles south, the eerie, hollow silence settling over the massive deep-water ports of the West African coast. Huge steel cranes, once the undisputed masters of global trade, stand motionless against the sky, rusting in the humid ocean air. For decades, these coastal ports held absolute, unquestioned power over the landlocked nations of the interior. These ports were not just transit hubs, they were instruments of control, built during the colonial era to extract the wealth of the continent and ship it to Europe. If you did not have an ocean, you were completely at their mercy. And when the economic community of West African states, acting in strict alignment with Western financial and political powers, decided to punish Burkina Faso for daring to claim its true sovereignty, they used the ultimate geographic weapon. They slammed the borders shut. They closed the ports. The blockade was designed to be swift, brutal, and totally uncompromising. The strategy, discussed in the quiet, air-conditioned boardrooms of Paris and Washington, was devastatingly simple. Cut off Burkina Faso from the sea, trap their valuable agricultural exports, choke their vital supply lines for medicine and fuel, and watch the nation collapse into chaos within 3 weeks. They wanted to starve the economy into absolute submission, forcing the leadership to crawl back to the negotiating table on their knees. Imagine being a landlocked country told by your own neighbors that your goods can no longer reach the world. For a man named Issa, a veteran truck driver who had spent 20 years navigating the dangerous and potholed coastal routes, this high-level political game became a harsh, physical reality. Issa was hauling 40 tons of premium Burkinabe cotton. This was the lifeblood of thousands of farmers, the result of a year of back-breaking labor. He drove his heavy rig toward a coastal port he had visited 100 times before, knowing every curve of the road. But on this day, the border gates were locked tight with heavy iron chains. Armed guards, following direct orders from their Western-backed governments, ordered him to turn back immediately. They did not care about his precious cargo. They did not care about the farmers waiting to be paid. They did not care about his livelihood or his family. They struck his vehicle with their rifles, mocked his nation's desire for independence, and left him stranded on the side of the road, his engine idling in the blistering 110-degree heat. The message from the coastal elites was perfectly clear. Bow down, surrender your resources, or your harvest rots in the sun. This was the tyranny of geography, weaponized against a proud and sovereign people. If you respect resilience, press like and stay with me. The entire international community expected Captain Ibrahim Traore and his transitional government to panic. They expected Burkinabe diplomats to fly immediately to foreign capitals, begging and pleading for the borders to be reopened. They expected the immediate surrender of the revolution, but they forgot exactly who they were dealing with. They forgot that when you push a proud, historically resilient people to the absolute edge of survival, they do not jump off the cliff. They turn around and build a massive bridge to a new future. But how does a nation without a single drop of ocean water survive when the whole world seemingly locks its global gates? The answer came not in the form of a desperate plea, but in the form of the greatest logistical and engineering masterstroke the African continent has witnessed in modern history. Ibrahim Traore and the visionary leadership of the newly formed Alliance of Sahel States did not waste a single moment complaining to the international press about the closed coastal borders. Instead, they turned their backs to the hostile south and looked directly north. They looked toward the vast, unforgiving, and ancient expanse of the Sahara Desert, and they saw exactly what their ancestors saw. They saw a highway. What followed was an absolute miracle of domestic engineering and sheer, unbreakable national willpower. If the sea was unjustly denied to them, they would simply bring the port into the heart of the desert. The government of Burkina Faso immediately launched the rapid construction of massive inland logistics hubs. These were not just simple storage warehouses or empty dirt lots. These were sprawling, highly sophisticated dry ports. They were massive terminals capable of handling millions of tons of containerized cargo, equipped with state-of-the-art customs clearance facilities, heavy lifting automated machinery, and direct secure links to newly paved trans-Saharan trade routes. The sheer scale and speed of the operation completely stunned international observers and global supply chain experts. Within a matter of months, hundreds of millions of dollars were boldly redirected into domestic infrastructure. Convoys of heavy construction equipment worked relentlessly, day and night under massive floodlights, cutting through the arid landscape, laying down thousands of miles of fresh asphalt, and establishing secure, high-speed corridors linking Burkina Faso directly to friendly, cooperative ports in North Africa, specifically forging powerful new trade arteries into Algeria and Morocco. The ancient, landlocked curse was literally being broken by asphalt, steel, and the sweat of a united people. Let us talk deeply about the numbers, because the numbers reveal the absolute magnitude of this victory. Over 3 million tons of critical cargo that previously flowed through the extortionate and hostile coastal ports were entirely and permanently rerouted. Thousands upon thousands of independent transport trucks were reorganized into massive, highly disciplined, military-protected convoys, moving goods seamlessly and safely across the northern borders. The agricultural heart of Burkina Faso did not skip a single beat. The premium cotton, the rich sesame, the heavy gold shipments, it all found a brand new, highly efficient path to the global market. In the intelligence corridors of Washington and Paris, the classified reports began to circulate, causing absolute shock and deep strategic confusion. The arrogant architects of the blockade had severely miscalculated the intelligence and resolve of the African people. They had foolishly assumed that geography was an unbreakable, permanent prison. They watched in absolute disbelief via high-resolution satellite imagery as the Burkinabe dry ports expanded week by week, operating with a level of digital efficiency and logistical discipline that openly rivaled major international maritime hubs in Europe. The United States military logisticians and European strategic planners, many of whom have spent their entire careers studying the art of supply chains, were forced to admit a begrudging, silent respect. The ability to pivot an entire national supply chain across the harshest desert environment on planet Earth, while under the intense pressure of severe coordinated economic sanctions, requires a level of organizational genius that very few nations in the world possess. But the story of this massive geographical hack does not end merely with the successful construction of the dry ports. In the cold world of geopolitics, every single action has a devastatingly equal and opposite reaction. While the diesel engines roared triumphantly in the north, a quiet, terrifying devastation was beginning to unfold in the south. What happens when the ultimate weapon of economic starvation spectacularly backfires, and the deadly trap you set for your perceived enemy suddenly snaps shut on your own foot? The coastal nations that so eagerly enforced the Western-designed blockade very soon realized they had made a catastrophic, perhaps irreversible historical error. By locking Burkina Faso and its allies out of their facilities, they had actually permanently locked themselves out of the most lucrative and consistent transit revenue in the entire West African region. The great coastal ports, once vibrant and bustling with the chaotic, highly profitable energy of massive international trade, began to hemorrhage money at a truly terrifying rate. The silence on the docks became deafening. This brings us to a man named Coffee, a veteran dock worker and union leader in one of those closely Western-aligned coastal cities. For his entire adult life, Coffee had proudly worked the massive shipping yards, operating heavy machinery, processing hundreds of shipping containers every single day, and taking deep pride in providing a steady, reliable income for his large family. But just a few short months after the political blockade officially began, Coffee stood on the edge of the sprawling shipyard, staring out at what had essentially become an industrial ghost town. The massive international cargo ships were simply no longer arriving. The millions of dollars in daily transit fees, tariffs, and handling charges had completely evaporated into thin air. The massive warehousing companies surrounding the port were filing for sudden bankruptcy, and the skilled crane operators, mechanics, and logistics clerks were being laid off by the absolute thousands. The coastal economies were rapidly crashing because they had completely lost the immense underlying volume of raw goods and materials coming straight from the heart of the Sahel. Coffee realized with a heavy, sinking heart during a tense union meeting that the political blockade intended to completely starve Burkina Faso had actually successfully bankrupted his own port and devastated his own community. It is a profound, undeniable moment of poetic justice. The weapon of economic exclusion utterly destroyed the excluder. Meanwhile, 1,000 miles away in the capital city of Ouagadougou, Captain Ibrahim Traore remained completely, almost unnervingly calm. This quiet stoicism is the absolute hallmark of his leadership and the new African paradigm. There was no boastful gloating on national television. There were no arrogant, fiery speeches mocking the rapidly failing coastal economies of his neighbors. The absolute silence of the Burkinabe leadership is exactly where their true, undeniable power lies. They simply let the brilliant logistics do the talking. They let the hardcore engineering and the paved roads do the fighting. This profound calmness is a terrifying prospect for the old colonial powers, because it definitively proves that the modern African resistance is no longer just a wave of temporary emotional anger. It is highly organized, deeply scientific, structurally invincible, and economically brilliant. The Alliance of Sahel States, comprising the newly united forces of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, integrated their logistical networks perfectly, creating a massive, self-sustaining economic fortress right in the middle of the continent. They proved to the entire watching world that African unity is not just a poetic political slogan to be shouted at rallies. It is a freshly paved, multi-lane trans-Saharan road. It is a highly synchronized, digitized, shared customs agreement. It is thousands of heavy trucks moving safely and freely across borders that no longer exist to divide them, but exist solely to connect their shared destinies. The psychological impact of this specific logistical victory simply cannot be overstated by any historian. For generations, the proud people of the African interior were explicitly told they were structurally dependent, that they were geographically inferior, and that they had to forever bow to the coastal elites and the Western cargo ships that docked there. Traore shattered that deeply colonial myth permanently. If you stand for dignity, press like and stay. He showed every single landlocked, developing nation in the entire world that true national sovereignty is not something granted by proximity to the ocean. It is built, brick by brick, road by road, by the calloused hands and the unbroken willpower of the people. As the massive, protected trade convoys continue to roll steadily north, carrying the immense wealth of a totally liberated nation, the entire geopolitical map of the African continent is being aggressively redrawn in real time. Has the ancient, supposedly unbreakable geographical curse of the landlocked nation just been broken forever? The profound success of the dry port masterstroke did not just silently solve a temporary trade dispute. It violently shifted the entire geopolitical center of gravity in West Africa. For over a century, the economic compass of the region always pointed south, toward the oceans and the foreign cargo ships. Today, because of the unwavering vision of the Alliance of Sahel States, that compass has firmly and permanently flipped. Domestically, the transformation unfolding inside Burkina Faso is nothing short of an absolute economic renaissance. The massive inland logistics hubs have rapidly evolved into booming, highly energetic economic zones. Small northern desert towns, previously considered remote and economically marginalized, are now critical, heavily defended arteries of international global trade. Entirely new secondary industries are organically springing up around these dry ports. Thousands of mechanics, highly skilled logistics coordinators, heavy truck operators, and security personnel are finding permanent, dignified employment. Local markets, which Western analysts predicted would be totally empty and starving by now, are instead overflowing with affordable, domestically produced food and essential goods. The massive revenue generated from these independent transit routes is being immediately injected straight back into the national foundation. It is actively funding the rapid construction of new schools, rural medical clinics, and upgraded military infrastructure. But the powerful ripple effect of this geographical hack extends far beyond the borders of Burkina Faso. In the neighboring nations of Mali and Niger, the brilliant success of the inland trade pivot is being studied, replicated, and deeply integrated. The Alliance of Sahel States is no longer simply a mutual defense pact designed solely for military security. It is rapidly transforming into a highly synchronized, heavily fortified economic bloc. The leaders of these three sovereign nations are openly coordinating their massive infrastructure projects, harmonizing their strict customs protocols, and pooling their vast natural resources to ensure that no single member can ever be isolated or starved by the international community ever again. They are building a self-sustaining, continental fortress that is completely immune to the traditional economic weapons of the West. And it is precisely this total immunity that is currently causing absolute panic in the highest strategic levels of the Western political establishment. In the heavily guarded think tanks of Washington, London, and Paris, deep national security analysts and elite military logisticians are desperately studying the Burkina Faso dry port model with a growing sense of profound dread. For decades, the economic blockade was the ultimate, undisputed, non-kinetic weapon of the global North. It was the silent killer. If a developing nation in the global South dared to step out of line, the West did not necessarily need to deploy combat troops. They simply cut off access to the global financial system, closed the vital international shipping lanes, locked the coastal ports, and quietly waited for the targeted nation to internally collapse from starvation and civil unrest. It was a terrifyingly effective, highly proven strategy of control. But Ibrahim Traore and the Alliance of Sahel States have just effectively neutralized that ultimate weapon. By successfully bypassing the coastal blockade through sheer willpower and brilliant domestic engineering, they have completely stripped the West of its most powerful deterrent. The deep, unspoken fear in the corridors of global power is not just about losing control of West African gold or cotton. The massive, terrifying fear is that the rest of the deeply exploited global South is watching this victory very, very closely. If a landlocked, supposedly impoverished nation in the heart of the harsh African Sahel can successfully defeat a coordinated, fully backed Western blockade, then the entire deeply flawed architecture of global economic dominance is suddenly completely vulnerable. The undeniable truth is spreading across the continent like wildfire. The old colonial chains are not actually made of unbreakable iron. They are made of paper, and they only exist as long as African nations agree to believe in them. Drop your city below. Let us map where truth travels. So, what exactly happens when an entire continent finally wakes up and realizes that the heavy prison doors were never actually locked? The profound, overarching meaning of this historic logistical victory goes far beyond the simple movement of cargo and the paving of asphalt roads. This was never just a minor dispute over transit fees or border protocols. This was, at its very core, a monumental battle for the psychological liberation of the African mind. For generations, the deeply ingrained narrative was that Africa was inherently helpless, structurally dependent, and completely incapable of complex, high-level strategic organization. Ibrahim Traore took that deeply insulting, historically inaccurate narrative and permanently buried it under thousands of miles of freshly paved trans-Saharan highway. When the hostile coastal nations built a massive political wall to violently stop the progress of Burkina Faso, the Burkinabe people did not waste their precious energy crying or begging the international community for mercy. They simply organized, mobilized, and built a massive, multi-lane road right around it. That is the true, undeniable definition of absolute sovereignty. It is not just about raising a national flag or singing a patriotic anthem. True sovereignty is highly logistical. It is deeply economic. It is the absolute, unquestionable ability to feed your own people and move your own wealth on your own distinct terms, regardless of what the rest of the world attempts to dictate. However, let us be perfectly clear and highly realistic about the difficult road ahead. The Western financial empire and its local, highly compromised proxies will absolutely not stop their aggressive campaigns of destabilization. They will inevitably attempt to utilize the World Bank and the World Trade Organization to impose new, highly restrictive global sanctions, They will try to manipulate regional currencies to cause sudden inflation. They may even attempt to fund and arm new, heavily equipped insurgent groups to directly attack the newly built northern trade routes. The intense pressure will absolutely continue to escalate because the old world order simply cannot afford to let this powerful model of independence survive and spread. But there is a profound, unshakable satisfaction in knowing that Africa is finally, truly prepared. The people are no longer operating out of a place of deep, historical fear. They are operating from a foundation of incredible strength, immense pride, and rigorous scientific organization. Consider the quiet, powerful moment happening right now in a small, newly constructed logistics town in the absolute north of Burkina Faso. An elderly grandfather, who has spent his entire life working the harsh, unforgiving soil, stands near the edge of the new, massive, dry port. For his entire life, he was taught to look desperately south, toward the distant, unseen ocean, waiting for foreign cargo ships to bring overpriced imported food and temporary conditional aid. He was taught to look at the sea as the only possible salvation. But today, he holds the hand of his young grandson, and they look directly north, watching the massive, endless line of heavy Burkina transport trucks roaring triumphantly toward the horizon, carrying the wealth of their own sovereign nation. The old man looks down at the young boy and quietly explains a profound new reality. He tells the boy that they no longer need to beg for access to the water. He tells him that through their own hard work, their own brilliant engineering, and their own unbreakable unity, they have essentially become the ocean. The wealth, the power, and the future now flow directly from them. The curse of geography has been permanently broken by the sheer, undeniable power of dignity. Press. Like if dignity and justice still mean something to you.